The recent events in the Middle East, I mean, they've been incredibly high stakes. We're talking about that dramatic Israeli strike on Iran and, well, everything that followed. It's really much more than just headlines, isn't it? It feels like a masterclass in modern intelligence, deception, information warfare. So the big question we're tackling today is, how did this really audacious operation actually unfold? And maybe more importantly, what does it tell us about global power and conflict right now?
Yeah, absolutely. In this deep dive, we're going to pull back the curtain on all the layers. It's everything from, the incredible precision of the strikes themselves to the really intricate deception campaigns that made them possible in the first place.
Yeah.
And then there are the ripple effects, right? Global markets, human lives, and of course that whole shadowy world of cyber warfare, which played a pretty significant role. We've looked at a lot of different sources, geopolitical analyses, financial reports, human rights watchdogs, and they paint let's say, a very multifaceted picture.
Right. So our mission today is to give you a clear understanding of these really complex events. We want to reveal some surprising facts, connect the dots, so you're not just informed, but actually feel insightful. Okay, let's dive in. To really get a handle on this, we need to go back to June 13th, 2025. That's when Israel launched Operation Rising Lion. And its stated goal was, well, pretty ambitious, a strategic collapse of Iran. They aim to eliminate key military and scientific figures, degrade missile infrastructure, take out early warning systems, quite a list.
It is. But what's truly remarkable here, I think, is how they did it. This wasn't your standard cross-border attack, not at all. What's fascinating is that Israel apparently pre-positioned remote-activated strike platforms inside Iran.
Inside Iran.
Yeah, deploying them with surgical precision. Their spy agency, Mossad, seems to have used AI, smuggled in drones. The reports say agents brought small, armed drones into Iran using vehicles. And they pre-positioned precision weapons near surface-to-air missile sites. Think about it. That allows for incredibly close-range strikes. I mean, this level of infiltration really speaks volumes about the intelligence failure Iran must have experienced. It suggests their national security apparatus might have been compromised quite deeply, not just, caught off guard.
That seems incredibly complex, almost like something out of a movie. But it wasn't just about the military tech, was it? You mentioned deception. The psychological warfare side sounds just as critical. What did that involve?
Oh, absolutely critical. Israel orchestrated this elaborate web of misdirection in the weeks leading up to the strike. They were essentially controlling the narrative before any kinetic stuff even started. For instance, the Israeli Security Cabinet meeting, the one that actually approved the operation. It was disguised as just a routine discussion about the Gaza hostage talk.
You're kidding.
Yeah. And Netanyahu's office even leaked the story that he was off attending his son's wedding up in Galilee. Made it seem like he was preoccupied with personal stuff. And get this, Mossad's director, along with an envoy, supposedly went off to Washington via Oman for a 6th round of nuclear talks.
Which never existed.
Exactly, totally fictitious. They even let rumors circulate about a rift, a disagreement between Netanyahu and President Trump over a potential Iran strike. It fostered this perception of political disunity, inside Israel's leadership.
So it's not just about tricking them in the moment, it's about paralyzing their decision-making, controlling the whole information space before a shot is even fired. But you have to ask, how did Iran miss all this? What were their critical miscalculations here?
Well, it really looks like Tehran was suffering from a kind of strategic complacency and some deeply flawed assumptions. They dismissed earlier warnings. Remember back in July 2024, the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, Hamas's top political guy, right there in Tehran?
Right, that was a big deal.
Huge. Then in September 2024, that sophisticated attack using explosive pagers against Hezbollah operatives in Lebanon killed dozens. But these were largely misread, apparently, as internal sabotage or maybe factional violence, not as hostile state actions. That points to maybe a structural flaw in how Iran's security establishment was reading threats, especially those emerging from within their sphere.
And what about those flawed assumptions you mentioned? What were they banking on that didn't pan out?
They seem to believe Chinese support was more solid than it turned out to be more about optics, as one analysis put it, not a real strategic shift. They saw the Saudi normalization deals perhaps as some kind of shield, and U.S. diplomacy. They viewed it as just a tactical delay tactic by the West. Plus, you had the collapse of Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria. That was triggered by Israeli strikes and internal defections, and it seriously disrupted Iran's regional strategy, their supply lines. But Iran just seemed to cling to these outdated assumptions, left them wide open, really.
So Operation Rising Lion kicks off. What was the immediate kinetic impact?
Devastating. Israel essentially obliterated Iran's air defenses. then struck strategic targets near Tehran, ground-to-ground missile sites, other critical infrastructure, a major blow.
But the real focus wasn't just infrastructure, was it?
No, the true focus, it seems, was Iran's strategic elite. The operation created this massive leadership vacuum almost instantly. Think about the names. Major General Mohammad Bagheri, the chief of staff, the architect of their drone and cyber warfare stuff. Major General Hussein Salami, the IRGC commander, kind of the ideological voice. Major General Gholam Ali Rashid, the mastermind of military ops. And key nuclear scientists like Dr. Faridun Abbasi Davani and Dr. Mohammad Mahdi Tehranchi.
Wow.
Taking them out severely crippled Iran's ability to coordinate to execute operations. They lost their key strategic architects in one fell swoop.
Okay, so with their top leadership hit so hard, how did Iran manage to respond? Supreme Leader Khamenei vowed a bitter and painful fate for Israel. Right?
He did. Their initial retaliation involved launching over 100 drones toward Israeli territory.
And how did that go?
Swiftly neutralized. Israeli air defenses took care of them within just a few hours. Pretty effective. After that, Iran launched subsequent missile strikes, but these targeted U.S. bases in Qatar and Iraq.
Shifting focus to the U.S. And what was the U.S. reaction, President Trump's reaction?
Yeah, that was noteworthy. President Trump claimed a complete and total ceasefire had been agreed upon. He described Iran's response as very weak.
Yeah.
He even thanked Iran for giving early notice of the strikes, said he hoped they'd gotten it all out of their system. Quite the statement.
Okay, so while all this kinetic action was happening, the strikes, the drones, the missiles, there was this other battle playing out, right?
Yeah.
Less visible. The cyber dimension, Iran's cyber capabilities have really evolved, haven't they?
They really have. It seems Iran rapidly ramped up its cyber game after two really key events. First, the mass demonstrations back in 2009, where the opposition used the internet so effectively. And second, that Stuxnet attack in 2010. That was the reported U.S.-Israeli operation that actually caused physical damage to Iran's nuclear program. Those two things really highlighted their vulnerability and pushed them to invest heavily in cyber.
And there's still some debate about just how sophisticated Iran is in cyberspace, right?
There is. You hear different perspectives. Some experts kind of categorize them as maybe third tier, focusing on, low-hanging fruit, poorly defended websites, easy targets. But others place them higher, maybe top of the second tier, with clear ambitions to do more. They point to things like the U.S. 2022 threat assessment, which flat out called Iran a major threat to U.S. and allied networks.
So not necessarily top tier like U.S. or China maybe, but definitely a serious player.
Exactly. The key thing is, regardless of the tier label, their capabilities are growing fast, and they pose a real challenge.
And how is Iran's cyber activity organized? It's not just random hackers, presumably.
No, it's quite structured. You have the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. They have their own electronic warfare and cyber defense organization, specifically for offensive ops. Then there's the BESI, that large paramilitary force. They claim to have something like 1,000 cyber battalions. But what they often do is outsource attacks to about 50 different hacktivist groups.
Hacktivist groups, like the ones we hear about.
Yeah. Groups with names like the Kittens, Charming Kitten, APTC-50. They often target things like social media, dissidents, foreign officials.
And how do they maintain plausible deniability if they're using state structures but also these groups?
They use various tactics, like they might develop malware but then abandon it once it's exposed, or they use trusted intermediaries, front companies, to outsource contracts. Their whole cyber strategy has evolved, really, through stages. Now they have pretty sophisticated offensive capabilities for disruption, destruction, espionage, and complex info ops. It's part of that hybrid warfare approach, blending digital and traditional tactics.
And didn't Iran also build its own internal internet, essentially the National Information Network, NIW?
That's right, their domestic intranet. And they've definitely leveraged that internally. They used it very effectively to suppress protests. Like in 2019, they shut down the regular internet for a whole week. It stopped protesters mobilizing and also hid what the security forces were doing. And they did it again in late 2022, during those even more severe protests disrupting internet and cell access. The powerful tool for social control, unfortunately.
Okay, zooming out a bit. Iran's cyber power isn't just homegrown, is it? It's tied into its global alliances.
Oh, absolutely. Deeply intertwined. We see deepening cyber cooperation with Russia, for example. They're discussing things like facial recognition tech, 5G, AI signing info security packs. There's even talk of Russia potentially transferring surveillance software to Iran's proxies.
And China.
Similar story. That big 25-year strategic agreement they signed includes Chinese help with 5G infrastructure, giving Iran access to China's Beidou GPS system, their alternative to U.S. GPS, and strengthening that National Information Network, the NIW. There are even reports of Chinese firms selling camera and AI technology directly to the IRGC, which was then repurposed for social control, like identifying protesters in crowds. So yeah, these global networks significantly boost their capabilities.
So we've talked military strategy, intelligence, cyber warfare.
Yeah.
But it's crucial we don't forget the real-world impact. What was the human and economic toll from all this?
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in the strategy, but the human cost is tragic and undeniable. Reports indicate over 4,000 Iranians and Israelis were injured or killed in the various cross-border strikes. And there are also reports suggesting over 200 Iranian civilian casualties resulted from the U.S. bombing actions. It really begs the question, amid this kind of volatility and tragedy, how do people, maybe investors, even navigate this landscape?
Well, it's complex, but there are some perhaps unexpected investment angles that emerge. The conflict definitely spurred a kind of boom in the defense sector. You see major suppliers like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon benefiting, and Israeli firms too, like Elbit Systems. There's just increased demand for advanced defense systems when things heat up like this.
Right, and on the other side of that coin, interestingly, we've seen a rise in what are called ESG-compliant humanitarian funds.
Yeah.
ESG, that's environmental, social, and governance criteria. These funds try to address the humanitarian crisis while sticking to ethical principles. So they offer opportunities in things like disaster relief, rebuilding efforts, healthcare in conflict zones. It's impact investing, essentially.
And while the immediate conflict might cool down, the intelligence operations, they just keep going, don't they? I remember reading a quote from Miri Eisen, an Israeli military intelligence specialist. She said something like, "Most people don't take themselves off the grid. You can get to anybody."
That's a chilling but probably accurate assessment in today's world.
And Israel certainly has a track record here. We talked about Stuxnet, but there was also that daring theft of Iran's entire nuclear archive back in 2018. These things are constantly happening beneath the surface.
Indeed. And a more recent example, right after the main strikes, was this Cyberfada incident. That was around June 22nd, 2025. Iran-linked actors leaked a whole trove of data stolen from the Saudi Games.
The Saudi Games, like the sporting event.
Exactly. It seems to have been part of a broader information operation, anti-U.S., anti-Israel, anti-Saudi, and they're increasingly targeting these major sports events. The data they leaked was really sensitive stuff. Personal information, passports, bank details, even medical forms of athletes and staff.
Why sports events, though? What makes them such attractive targets now?
Well, several reasons. There's obvious financial gain stealing data for sale, ransomware attacks, ticket scams. There's the geopolitical propaganda angle, embarrassing a host nation, spreading disinformation. You can cause operational disruption with things like DDoS attacks. Plus, these events have hugely interconnected digital systems, ticketing, broadcasting, securities, lots of potential entry points. And they offer access to high-profile individuals, athletes, sponsors, officials. It's kind of a perfect storm for malicious actors.
Putting all this together, the kinetic strikes, the cyber attacks, the information warfare, it really underscores how important critical thinking is becoming, right? In a world just saturated with information and, well, misinformation.
Absolutely. The sources we looked at strongly suggest that dominance in modern conflict isn't just about scale anymore. It's about the ability to preemptively shape the narrative, to conceal your actions, to control the tempo of events. It's about outmaneuvering your opponent often before the real fight even begins.
So this deep dive has really laid bare the sheer sophistication of modern warfare. We've seen this intricate web of deception, psychological ops, the undeniable impact of cyber capabilities, and the complex geopolitical ripple effects, plus those very real, often tragic human and economic consequences that stretch way beyond any single border.
Yeah, this brings us to, I think, a really critical question for you, the listener.
Yeah.
Given everything we've discussed today, these detailed accounts of deception, infiltration, information control, how do you now evaluate the information you come across about global conflicts? How do you sift through it?
Right. We've seen how intelligence, psyops, cyber tools are actively shaping not just outcomes, but our very perceptions. So when the next major global event happens, what layers of strategy might be operating just beneath the surface that we need to look for?
It's worth considering how a deeper understanding of these, complex dynamics
Yeah.
can actually empower you in this age of constant information overload. It helps you ask better questions.
So what stands out most to you from today's deep dive? What angle are you going to be watching or looking into next?